Welcome to Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. Today I want to talk about a topic that has really plagued me, or it did plague me for a number of years. And I think I had more than my fair share of problems with this. It's string jumping. String jumping is the act of the deer dropping down to load up its legs to bolt away when it hears the sound of the shot, maybe hears the arrow coming toward it, possibly even sees the movement of the bow limbs in the tree. There's a lot of things that can, like when you're firing the shot, seeing the bow move. There's a lot of stuff that can trigger this, but I really believe it's the sound of the bow. I mean, I've heard people say it's the arrow. I mean, we're getting into some, splitting hairs here, but the point is, the deer reacts to the shot. It hears something, starts to drop down to load its legs to run off, and in the process of doing that, the kill zone drops several inches. It can go, I've seen it drop as much as 12 inches, on a 30-yard shot, where the arrow hits 12 inches above the aim point on the deer. Obviously, this is a real problem. One of the most common misses or poor hits on whitetail is the high hit. And I've talked about it in one of the segments that I did earlier on how to shoot from a tree, and the fact that sometimes shooting form can affect where the arrow hits when you're aiming down. But a bigger part of that, in my opinion, is string jumping. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Day 6 Arrows, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail, Fuse Accessories, and Hoyt. I've kicked it around from every possible direction. I've had veteran bow hunters tell me what they do. The whole question of, do you stop a deer that's walking? Say the deer is walking at 25 yards or 30 yards away. Are you better off learning how to make that shot by timing the shot rather than making a sound, putting the deer on alert? Now it's locked up, it's tense, maybe even looking at you in the tree. That is more likely to be a string jumper than anything else that you're going to encounter. You've stopped the deer, now it's aware that something's in that tree, it's focused in the direction of that sound. So are you better off learning how to take that shot walking? So anyway, there's a lot of questions in here that I'm going to try to unpack at least a little bit. I may not get through all of it in this episode. Might be something we come back to later. But first, let's just talk about the average deer standing, broadside. How far away can that deer react quickly enough to drop enough that it makes a difference in the impact point of your arrow? It's different for different parts of the country. Here in the Midwest, I think 25 yards and in, you pretty much don't have to compensate for string jumping. I don't think the deer here react that quickly, but I've hunted down south and those deer are wired a lot tighter. And I've had deer completely vacate on, I think I had a 22-yard shot one time down in Mississippi. I thought, well, this is a dead doe. I took the shot and the arrow hit right where I was aiming, but the deer wasn't even there anymore. I mean, the deer had completely spun and gotten out of the sight picture on a 22-yard shot with a fairly fast bow. So it makes a difference in where you hunt. So when I talk about distances, that's kind of a relative number. I'm going to really focus more or less on the Midwest because that's where I understand the best, but you may have to translate these numbers over to the areas where you hunt and how your deer react. So let's look at beyond 25 yards. And I've had my biggest problems on 30-yard shots, between 30 and 40. And I think it's because the deer are close enough that they really register that sound as danger, but they're far enough away that they have plenty of time from the point when they react to it until the arrow gets there. They drop. They have plenty of time to, for gravity to pull them to the ground. I think past 40 yards, it's a little bit less of an issue. It's still important. And I don't take a lot of shots past 40 yards anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. But the further away they get, the less sensitive they seem to be to the sound of the shot. And again, it's all, It's not even an exact science. You know, people talk about maximum range for whitetails, and I don't know that you can actually come up with a good number there. It's I can tell you what it is if they don't move, but I can't tell you what the maximum range is on a whitetail because the deer has to be there when the arrow gets there. So 40 yards for me tends to be about the end of where I'm comfortable anticipating where the arrow or where the deer is going to be when the arrow gets there. So let's go through the aiming points now. And again, I'm jumping probably through some topics that we can come back to and hit a little bit harder, like arrow speed, versus the amount of noise that the bow makes. Maybe I'll have a second to come back to that at the end of this. But so on a 25 yard in the Midwest, 25 yard shot, I'm aiming, low kill zone. I'm aiming, somewhere above the heart in that, low lung area. That deer is very, very unlikely to move in the areas where I hunt. 30 yards and further, I'm aiming at the brisket line, believe it or not, on most shots. I mean, the deer has to be really relaxed, and there has to be a little bit of background noise, maybe the leaves are rattling or something like that, so that I feel like it's not going to react at all before I would aim above the brisket line. If the deer is alert on a 30-yard shot, I'm aiming right at the very bottom edge of that deer. I feel like he's going to drop at least 4 inches, maybe as much as 12. So I've got to be right down there on the edge. And unfortunately, I've had situations where I've done that and then the deer didn't react. There was a buck that I killed back in 2016 that I called Skinny. He came past at 30 yards following a doe. I grunted, he stopped, I aimed for his brisket line. He didn't drop, and the arrow actually shaved hair off his brisket line, and then he didn't move until the arrow hit the dirt behind him. Then he dropped and ran off a little ways and stopped and looked back, and I was able to kill him. But that was a fluke that I was able to actually kill that deer, because that should have been the end of the game, when that arrow smacked into the dirt, behind him. But that's an example of sometimes they just don't react, but more often than not they do. So you have to play the odds and you have to aim low on those shots. When you've got an alert deer 30 yards away, in my mind, you got to be almost 6 inches low to feel real good about that, which puts it, again, like I said, at the bottom of the brisket. Now, past 30 yards, if the deer is alert, you have to be increasingly low. And I tend to favor hanging back just a little bit further back from the shoulder, because generally they drop and turn. So they're settling and turning, and that opens up a different part of their vitals. So it's more like, a couple of inches below the brisket, maybe as much as 3 inches below the brisket, and then a little bit back, maybe a few inches further back on the deer than you normally would. And that works pretty well. Again, if they don't drop, life's good. The deer got away, no harm done. And if they do drop, then you should be right in the kill zone. And it's, like I said, it's an inexact science, and you just take your chances. I mean, I don't like missing deer, but I like that a whole lot better than wounding them. And I've had my share of them. I've had 3 or 4 nice bucks, really nice bucks, that got away because of string jumping. And the lessons that you learn from that are kind of hard to swallow, and it's hard to take because you don't know what direction to go. Do you think, okay, I need to shoot a faster arrow so it gets there quicker, so the deer can't drop as far? Do I need to shoot a quieter bow so the deer can't hear it? Or, as what I've came to, is my conclusion, is no matter what bow I'm shooting and what arrow speed I'm shooting, I'm going to be a little bit low on my aim point, because I've learned that you can't shoot fast enough to beat it, and you can't make a bow quiet enough to beat it. Everybody thinks you can make a quiet enough bow that the deer don't hear it, but that hasn't been my experience. If it's windy, then they probably won't hear it, but on normal days, especially if it's still, they're going to hear that bow, and even if it's a quiet bow, if they're alert. So that's my takeaway on string jumping. I think we'll come back, like I said, and play some of these trade-offs, of speed versus noise. Maybe that will make a really cool episode, in the future. But for now, like I said, my conclusion is you just have to aim low and take your lumps if the deer doesn't react. More than likely it will.
I suppose we should address one last thing too. What if it's not alert? What do you do then? Oh boy, I wish I knew. You know, with does, I've seen some really weird stuff with does in food plots. I had one time at 40 yards. It was relaxed. I shot, it moved, gone. I mean, the arrow, it didn't even duck under the arrow. It just spun out and left. Well, then it didn't know what really happened, so it came sneaking back and, you know, to smell the arrow and to kind of figure out what happened. And I thought, well, I don't really know what to do here, so I'm just going to aim dead on. I aimed dead on. The deer didn't move. You know, even as it came back again in more of an alert posture, it didn't drop. You know, that was just maybe a lucky guess on my part. But I think on relaxed deer, you have to, I don't know, that's a good question. I think you have to aim a little bit low, but not out of the vitals. You know, I think on a 40-yard shot, you have to be at the brisket line, and on a 30-yard shot, you probably have to be heart region on deer that aren't alert, relaxed deer. And I know there's been a lot of studies done on deer that have their heads down because, you know, they can lift their head up and that creates leverage to bring their midsection down. You know, I've seen those studies, but it doesn't really bear out with what I've seen in the field either. You know, there's been a lot of situations where, you know, I've had deer that really jump the string with their heads up, a lot of them. So don't assume that just because it has its head down that it's going to jump, and if it has its head up, it won't. I don't feel like that conclusion holds up. I think you have to aim low on almost every shot, unless it's really, really clear that the deer isn't going to be able to hear the shot. So I'm going to leave it at that. Like I said, it's a frustrating thing. It's probably the hardest decision that we have to make as whitetail hunters at full draw, is where to aim. You know, it seems like it should be pretty instinctive and self-explaining or obvious, but in reality, because the deer moves, there's a whole lot that goes into it, making that final decision. I hope I helped you a little bit. We're going to keep coming back to this topic because I feel like it's a super important one. So I appreciate you joining me, and we'll see you right back here again for the next episode of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.